Let me go to Sue Varden, if I can, just to start with. And I was talking to Sue over the last few days as we developed, and it was obvious, you know, with somebody who's worked in government at all levels and right across the country, she has had a chance to have a look at the public sector, you know, inside, outside, up, you know, from the bottom, from the top, from the side. But one of the ideas I know she's particularly focused on at the moment is how well we actually value and draw on citizens' time. We talked a lot about co-creation, and we might come to that a bit later, and co-design and all those other co-words. But I wonder whether the public sector is either doing that well enough or often being sufficiently open and engaging with citizens and recognising their work. So Sue, perhaps you might like to start us off with a few remarks on that, and just nice and close to the microphone. That's great. Thank you.
Look, there are two things to talk about, and I only want to talk about one of them now because the conference has talked about the other one. We've had a lot of conversation about how citizens should be much more involved in program design. I want to go back to basics. I was very fascinated yesterday when everyone who started the speech talked about how important it was to get the citizens' trust back and how the politicians wanted to improve customer service. And then when you did that cloud thing, the words citizen and customer did not appear on any of the three cloud things. And I was just wondering then if the cliche that we might be fronting is that the public service believes in customer service. I have had the chance to read an awful lot of corporate literature, and I've read a lot of websites. And I think that we put the cliche out there in public, but I think that there's not a lot of follow-through inside the organisation. So we heard Gary Bax talk about good process when it comes to policy, and we certainly heard about in the city's conversation yesterday, it's really very important to first get the basics right before you put the IT on top of it. And I think that we still haven't got the basics right. And I just want to if I've got time, just very quickly talk through. I want to also say that not only have I recently worked at all levels of government and done the capability reviews, but I've actually had to be a citizen of government, which has been a bit frightening. So one of the things I wanted to say, and this comes from being a citizen, if a department or a council, and I'm talking to local government too, makes its point of contact incomprehensible, with long waits on the phone, a creation of the non-customer accessible positions. Now, I was shocked to find they exist. Force-feeding people online, to go online, constantly cancelling meetings, the citizens' time is wasted. And if a department or a council has many offerings which are unconnected and the citizen has to go in and out or has no understanding of the range of services, the citizens, the producer, and anyone who's dealing with government, their time is wasted. If two or more departments are required to complete a transaction, and there are millions of them, that there's no flow or handover, the citizen, the charity, the producers, the exporters, the builders' time is wasted. And the public service time is wasted as well. And if the burden of paper electronic accountability takes up half the time of the service deliverer, the nurse, the teacher, the social worker, their time is wasted and service is affected. And if the solution bears little relation to the problem, everybody's time is wasted. If there's upward delegation of small decisions and staff are immobilised, the bias for no becomes the default, and everyone's time is wasted. Wasted time costs money, it leads to frustration, it leads to lack of trust, loss of money everywhere, delays in economic growth, and visits to the local MP. I was surprised about how many people in my neighbourhood go straight to the local MP. No wonder MPs think that there's a breakdown in trust with the bureaucracy. And we reduce the confidence of our staff. So I just wanted to very quickly say the things that are really important to me are that we need to rethink the way we deal with social issues, and we heard that. We need to get out there again and follow the citizen, the producer, the builder, the exporter, their journey with government and reflect that back into process. We know that 2/3 of all process is not value added, so why do we keep building it like coral on the barrier reef? There are really good examples of how some organisations have worked to get better relationships, and I give you the arts. In the arts department, there are desks, and those desks look after people. There are lots of people who do warm transfers, warm handovers. The environment people do a great job in pushing out good information to the citizens who want to improve their neighbourhoods, and so on. But I have to say that the bulk of the experience of the public sector at the moment is that they're taking customer service not terribly seriously. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well that'll get us on. So here's sort of cliche number one, customer-focused, citizen-centric. Have we heard those words before? Possibly. Let's dive right, I'm going to do girl, boy here. You'll notice the perfect balance of this group, apart from me obviously, and I am the balancing person. But let's go right inside the system with Andrew in Victoria and ask for a system view, if you like, of the kind of challenges that are inherent in the notion of we need capable, connected, high calibre change within the public sector. Andrew, just a few thoughts from your perspective.
Okay, so just very quickly to pick up the point about wasting the citizens' time, one transaction in Victoria we do 735,000 times a year is send out registration labels to people, and we just got rid of them because you've got a number plate in your car and we kind of know the details and we can take a photograph of it, so no more registration labels. And that's a productivity improvement straight in at the base of the economy. For a piece of paper that's now meaningless, there's a lot of meaningless pieces of paper out there. What do you do in tough times? The conversation we've been having around the table at the Victorian Secretary's Board is the capability conversation, and I realise capability can be a cliche, so we've identified 6 areas where we think we have to challenge ourselves to do better over the next couple of years. One is actually the use of new technology. We're not very good at it and we need to get better. Our commercial skills aren't as sharp as they need to be because we're out in a commercial market, acquiring big licks of infrastructure, dealing with merchant banks and so on. We need those skills spread across the public service. Governance, we need to do better at setting up public institutions and how they're governed. Asian capability, now you would say, what the hell does that mean? Most of the money flowing in to develop the Victorian economy comes from Asia. You know, how many languages do we have? Who speaks them? Are we engaging the Asian business community and so on? Change management, so we're going to have to evolve and transform public services at all 3 levels of government over the next decade, and what our staff say to us is you're not good enough at change management, so we have to do better at change management. And then the issue of strategy. So public policy is a conversation, has been in the past a conversation between the government and the community. Going forward, public policy might be informed by a conversation that happens in the community that governments respond to. And so that brings questions about how you do strategy, public policy. On the challenge side, if you like, I think 2 big ones. One is clearly the fiscal environment. How do you pay for building capability? You make tough judgments about how you're going to fund the best and the brightest to get the skills you need them to have, and how you're going to balance that out with getting the work done, so the fiscal challenge. And the other thing I think is probably a national challenge in that is that we haven't had the burning platform. We haven't had the burning platform that you would have heard people talk about already, say in the UK. And so if you don't have a burning platform, how do you make big transformation? And to use a cliche there, big vision, small steps seems to be the way to go. And certainly that's what we're trying to get to. Constant little steps, something we should have learnt from the IT industry, but so I'll stop there.
We'll come to the IT industry later in terms of what they can and can't share, and that's terrific. Let me flip to the other side of the table for a minute and go to Elizabeth. One of the things I think we've all heard a lot about over quite a long time now is the need for a more diverse workforce, and we'll talk to Tom in a moment around the Indigenous issues in particular. But I was talking to Elizabeth a couple of days ago about, I think you mentioned Telstra has now got to the stage where it's actually saying pretty much every job anywhere in the business is at least susceptible to being designed in ways which maximise the capacity for a very diverse group of people to be able to go for it, part-time, full-time, all sorts, mobile, non-mobile and so on. Is that where we've got to go? Is that a huge lever that corporations and also public agencies can start to pull if we're seriously going to get into the diversity game well beyond the cliche, I guess?
Thanks, Martin. And I do want to acknowledge that we're meeting on Aboriginal land and pay my respects to Elders past and present and to Aboriginal people present as well. So thanks. But a great question. Flexibility is absolutely key, I think, to the work practices and the new technologies, the appropriate use of new technologies, and for knowledge workers. And at the end of the day, that's what government employees are. We're knowledge workers. That flexibility is absolutely the key. And in fact, Telstra announced their All Roles Flexible initiative, which will begin from the 1st of January 2014, and where they will advertise every role in a flexible work arrangement and every role in that organisation will be available in a flexible work arrangement. What that does is it actually changes the starting point. So now we start from a point where the role's flexible. Now, why does this role need to be done in a part-time or what we call the ideal worker model? And the conversations change once you start to do that. But I just wanted to also add that when we look at women's role in terms of a public service, and is it a cliche or is it an essential part of a 21st century, the fact is that we've come a huge way. I mean, even if you look back in '67, women represented 24% of the APS workforce and 0.2% of the senior workforce. Today we have around 57% of the APS is female and 39% in SES roles. But I found this beautiful quote, actually, which the current Public Service Commissioner gave me, and it's a quote from Duncan McLaughlin, first Commonwealth Public Service Commissioner, on whether or not women should come into the public service. So this is around 1920. He says, even when women continue in the service, it's found that they reach their limit of usefulness at a comparatively early age if placed in positions ordinarily filled by men. While they may stand the strain and pressure of work for a time, women are psychologically unfitted to carry responsibility at an age when men are improving and developing their capacity in this respect.
How true. Yeah. Excellent.
I'm glad to tell you that that's no longer the case. Women are taking over the APS at 57%. But the reality is we still are seeing a very slow number growth in those number of women at the most senior levels. And I think until we have leadership and power shared equally between men and women at the most senior levels of all sectors, but including the public sector, then we've got more work to do, and we can talk about what that might be later on.
Fantastic. And let me go to the end of the table and acknowledge my mistake for not having acknowledged the Aboriginal elders and others when we first started, and it's really great to have Tom here. But the other area has been around Indigenous engagement inside the public sector, and it seems to me you've had a long experience as a public sector worker yourself. Are we getting beyond the cliches there? Are we genuinely moving to the point where that's beginning to shift in terms of their engagement and contribution?
I think it's, firstly I too acknowledge the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri and other claimants for this area, and pay respects to their elders. But I think it's been up and down. At one stage when ATSIC was around, we had about 30, just over 30 Aboriginal SES. We're down to we're up actually. We're down to about 12 until recently. We're now up to 17 Aboriginal SES, which is and Torres Strait Islanders, which is very small. But over the period of time, I guess it's waned a fair bit, and so we need to put a fair bit of effort into it. But there's two dimensions to it. One is having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within the service, and the other is providing a service to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I guess there's a couple of cliches that jump out at me, and one is, trust me, I'm a public servant, and the other is I'm here to hear what you've got to say. Let's go into another period of consultation. And let me tell you that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are probably the most reviewed and consulted people, and the other big message is that often those consultations don't bear fruit in the reports that come out of the consultations, or the consultations happen in a way that selected Aboriginal people are be in a community or at a national level are being consulted and expected to represent the views of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So the dimension is internally in the public sector. How do we do it? Improve the participation rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the retention rate, which is a big challenge. We've got to make that workforce and the work environment more conducive. The second is, how do we provide a service? And I think in part that's got to do with people becoming more aware and informed about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, history, the impacts of things like colonisation and the decolonisation process, to move away from blaming the victim for their circumstance and having a better understanding, and to tune out of some of the shock jocks and the mainstream media who are out there to create an image of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people without really looking at the facts. And the one that's often quoted is that, that alcohol is the biggest killer of Aboriginal people and the major issue that impacts on our lives. In fact, tobacco is the biggest contributor, nearly 20% of all chronic diseases. Alcohol is about 7%, still pretty high, but it's only 7%. But the real staggering statistic is that there are less Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people drinkers, consumers of alcohol than in the general population. But that's a stark statistic that's never ever represented, because those who do drink enough for all of us who don't. But that's an issue. So it's about cultural awareness. It's about cultural competence, and we see some moves in that area. FAXIA, now DSS, have got an Indigenous strategy. Other departments have got them as well. And cultural competency training or cultural awareness training is increasing, and for all staff. And so to be able to deliver an effective service, you've got to understand the environment. If we want to be a citizen-centred public service, then that's the approach we have to take.
Terrific. All right. Let me come back to Verona and right back to Canberra, and we're in the grip of a new government. We heard from the Minister last night, I think quite interesting comments he made, and no one in this room needs to be reminded of the interesting conversations and debates that are going on right now about cuts and no cuts and double cuts and all the rest of it. It's a tough environment. But Verona, in a sense, the future is now in the hands of this government, and see where they're going to take it. What sort of big issues and challenges are you beginning to sense that they're going to have to grapple with if we are wanting to move down the path which Eric Abetz was very clear last night he wanted to see the public service go down in terms of competence and capability and all those other great words?
I think that, well, first of all, let me say that, as you know, I'm always on the outside looking in, and so I spend most of my time translating your cliches into my cliches. I think that I'm always reminded that Arthur Miller said that a great newspaper was a nation talking to itself. And I think that the big risk for the public service, both with the new government charting a new course that then some of which they're clear about and some of which they're actually not clear about, but what they are clear about is reducing the size of the public service, and you've already suffering the efficiency dividends of the last 2 years. I think the great risk is that under all this kind of emotional pressure, the budget cuts and all the rest of it, that the public service will turn inwards and speak only to itself. I think the public service is prone to do this anyway, because big systems are inclined to do that, and I think James Wolferson referred this morning to the developed world living in its own ecosystem, and I think that we're, in all organisations we're prone to do that, but I think that's a big risk for the public service in trying to carry forward at the moment, because it was one of the consequences of the 1996 to 2000 cuts, which, as Ian Watt mentioned yesterday, anyone who is employed after the year of 2000 probably doesn't remember, but those of you who were there will remember they were very painful. And I think that this particularly happens when the directions of reform, internal reform in this case, are not yet clear, and they're obviously not yet clear. And I think that that this is also exacerbated. This tendency for the public service to look inward at time of crisis is exacerbated, of course, by a relative isolation in Canberra, where ACT public service and the APS are the dominant workforces. I know from experience what it's like to be in an industry that's fracturing and even disintegrating, where technology is driving change, where it is extremely difficult for the leaders to harness technology in order to drive the change that they want. And I think that this is also one of the big issues. But I think there are also systemic problems in the public service, which I think former Senators Vanstone and Evans picked up this morning, and I think some of those are cliches, but some of you must know in your hearts that there are issues there. And there are things like the need for a quick and agile response to ministers. This is very difficult, and there's some departments, I mean, we know from media experience that some departments are just appalling at this, responding to the media, but also to ministers, because you ring ministers' offices and they're so frustrated that they don't yet have a reply, and they're afraid of what you're going to say if they haven't got a reply for you. So that really sort of rang a bell with me. The issue of the hierarchy, to outside eyes, the public service employment hierarchy seems incomprehensible. How could you have so many layers? You know, it's not just that we work in a flat structure, it's just that the quintuple handling of things. I know my husband writes about defence, and he counted once at a very simple question to a minister's office, to which he already knew the answer, but was obliged to ask the question. Came back, it had been through 8 pairs of hands, and this was last year, and yet the public service talks about having streamlined processes, and I think that these sorts of issues are manifest and are problems for public servants as much as they are from all of us on the outside. I think that under the current circumstances, one of the big problems is going to be being driven by fear. I think that that's a really big thing. I think that the job cuts to the margins of the public service in the EEO groups are at very high risk. It'll be interesting to see in another year's time what the profile of women is in the public service, given how many part-time and non-permanent public servant women there are, let alone the really, really hard-pressed EEO groups of disability, Indigenous and people with non-English speaking background. But I think that Ian Watt has made it very clear, and that was very interesting, that he wants you to all be on the front foot when it comes to responding to this Commission of Audit. And I think that's something the public service can do, which they couldn't really do in 1996. The public service was, in a sense, ambushed in 96, even though Fightback had been out. It had been so destroyed by Paul Keating politically that I think the public service came to believe that it couldn't have any credibility, but of course the two don't necessarily compute, and so I think the public service was ambushed by that, and I think there are only so many conservative ideas that the Commission of Audit can have about the public service, and you've seen a lot of them, you could probably list them on your hands, and so I think that gives you the opportunity to come with some really good preparation for policy and for structural reforms, and not so much ambush the Commission, but at least have some really good constructive responses when they come with what are going to be some pretty heart-rending options, I think. I think that's... Yes, and I think there's no... After you've had so many changes of Prime Minister, it would be really easy to have a culture that said, we can sit them out. They won't last. It'll be another one soon. And I don't think that that's a risk that you can afford to take.
And probably unlikely, but who knows at the moment anyway. Not so much maybe a crisis, but an opportunity. I just thought I'd throw another cliche in, you know, to add to the list. So here's another one, just as my segue to young Pete here, because it's a cliche I've spent the last 10 years of my life perpetrating, and the cliche is connected government. Okay, particularly around the technology space. Now, the truth is, I think the technology world, the digital domain, if I can use that phrase, I think has a lot of things to teach us about speed and flexibility and prototyping and how they approach the business of getting results and moving quickly to get things done and all the rest of it. Pete, I know, has spent some time engaging in different ways with the public sector more broadly, and I'm just wondering if you get a sense maybe that the digital world does in fact have something to teach. Is it making a difference? Is it still marginal, or are we beginning to see some genuine push past that connected government kind of cliche, which I think does get trotted out rather a lot?
I mean, maybe just to start, I don't know if you guys walk out on the street or watch TV or look on YouTube, but you were architected in a non-connected era, and you're sort of thinking, we will do. You know, we need more capability. Why? Crowdsource it. You got, you know, Victoria is the #1 state in the world for developing crowdsource models. So what do you need a capability? Kaggle have gone and got 100,000 of the best data scientists in the world. They'll do the shit for you for $3,000. You know, I just sort of think you guys...
I think that's a technical term. But
you guys are still...
Write that one down.
You're still living in this sort of world of, you know, we will do, and, you know, in the digital world, we live in the world of not democracy, not hierarchy, of do-ocracy. People who do stuff, you know, take the spoils. And we'll do it for you if you let us. So the other thing is that we mobilise these days. And you look at the Arab Spring. So whether it's Tunisia, Libya, Taksim Square, the protesters in Brazil, it's like locally the recreational fishermen against the super trawler, the live cattle exports. We mobilise, but you guys are still in this world of we're in control. Well, you know what? We are mobilising against rigid hierarchies. And, today you might think we're not a rigid hierarchy. What are you going to look like in 20 years if you don't change? Are you going to get rolled? I reckon you will, because I don't see that you're really relevant. You're not actually creating a platform for communities to do stuff. We have the capabilities in the communities. We think globally. So we don't, like you guys say, oh, you web guys, you're really risky. I'm like, risk to me is spending $1.5 billion on a 8-year payroll project. Risk to me is building your own ticketing system when you could have gone and rented Hong Kong's or Singapore, which just kicks the crap out of what we've got. I prototype. You guys work on the big dollars, do it slowly and stuff it up. We work on take what's there, use it real fast, don't employ people, get people to work with us because they want to, because they're passionate, and make stuff happen really fast. So examples would be, I'm on the advisory board of Possible, crowdfunding mob. I think we're giving more money directly to the arts in Victoria than the government is. 2 blokes, one guy was a Chinese student, one was an Irish student, and we're belting it out there. How much do we spend? $1 million a year. How much do we give out? Multi-millions. Directed by the public. People put up what they want, chronically underfunded sectors, bang, we're provisioning for them. I just sort of look at this and saying, we've got all this process and, you could have the rest of the arts community and all the science community fill grants for 6 months a year. Why don't you let them do stuff? We've got some of the great scientists. Well, what do they do? Oh, we've got to write this stupid grant application for 6 months and then we'll spend another 3 months writing an acquittal. You're in the way. So if you guys can't get out of your own way and get out of our way, we'll just roll you. So I'd start to think about that. So the way we look at it, we mobilise passionate communities. We leverage it with what's there. I talk to people about cloud in government. And when the CIO gets up from the floor having convulsed in the fetal position for 10 minutes, it's like, well, what about security? What about risk? What about privacy? And I'm like, mate, how are you a CIO of a government department if you can't deal with IT security? It is not hard. Sure, the hackers will have a crack at you and all that stuff, but you know what? Work it out. We don't sort of say, oh, we will not do anything. You look at the health stuff. I did a gig with some health guy, this security guy who was going to do a live demo. He couldn't even log into it. And he was the guy who did the security. Well, that's really good for Joe Public.
Well, it obviously worked, clearly, because it was
really secure. But then you look at 23andMe and Sergey Brin, he realises, you know what, I sequenced my genome, I'm a 50% chance to get Parkinson's disease. Bang, whacks in money, buys care together, and suddenly everybody who's got Parkinson's disease, they're not worried about privacy, they're worried about living. They give all their data there. You guys, we must protect your privacy. I don't want privacy. You know what? if you can take my data and you're going to make it useful for me, I will give it all to you, and I don't give a stuff if you give it to everybody else. I spoke to somebody in the fire services the other day about a notion of a smoke alarm for remote communities. 2 of my family members got burnt out on Black Saturday. And he says, and I said, what we can do is we can just send a message into a smoke alarm into a remote house and people will know there's a fire coming at them, because on Black Saturday most of them didn't know. And the tradition in Australia of collapsing websites, and New South Wales just did it again. I mean, God, you guys can't even run a web server. So, and his first question was, what about the liability? And I said, you know what, I don't give a stuff about the liability. I give a stuff about that 173 people died on Black Saturday and no one had to. And you're worried about liability. It's like, I'm worried about outcomes, you guys are worried about what not to do. Risk to me isn't spending $1 billion on a project which is, sort of create an illusion of certainty by spreadsheets and PowerPoints. It's about doing stuff and learning fast, failing fast and learning by doing and delivering powerful outcomes. So it's all there and you guys could leverage it, but if you keep thinking it's us against you, it's we are smarter than you provide a platform for us. Kate Lundy did the great declaration of open government like the Gettysburg Address, but pretty well nothing's happened since then. The problem here is, technology is really easy, it's not hard. This sort of thing, oh, technology's hard, it's bloody easy. The hard part is leaders in the public sector who are prepared to navigate the politics and drive outcomes. So if you are those guys, get off your ass and start to lead. that if you're worried about being on the front page of the Canberra Times or the Herald Sun or whatever, you know what? You know, welcome to a global world where sort of state-based governments and federal governments and the Treaty of Westphalia model just collapses. So that's my view. Right. And I'm working hard to make it happen too.
Okay, very good. So when Pete says get off your ass, not just yet, but soon. And the frustrating thing about Pete, he never tells you really what he thinks, but you'll work somewhere around there what he's after. I want to put pretty much that entire speech briefly to the right-hand side of my table to start with, so Sue and Andrew, and also to Elizabeth, within the current systems. I mean, how much sense does that make? How much sense? Pete's quite brave, he can take a bit of pushback if you feel the need. But you know, don't think and plan, mobilise. How does that work?
Look, I don't totally
close to the microphone if you can.
I don't totally agree with the fact that we are a bit boring, but we are boring because we are in a constraints of some things, and we have to work out what are real constraints and what are not real constraints. And one of the things I would have liked to have added on is that we've really got to allow the young people and other people at the local level to take much more risk and be more creative when it comes to listening to views and all that sort of stuff. And we heard about Wikipedias, we heard about getting information, and you don't have to go out and do surveys. The information is there, you need to pull it in, that's fine. We don't live in the same world that he lives in, funnily enough. We live in a world that has some constraints, and it's called the ministers and, you know, the world that they're in. But they are also very close to the citizen. So they also want the citizen to be happy and to be contributing and so on. But they don't want their stuff just right now out there so that everybody can have a conversation about it. And I just at this moment tell you that IBM, I was at a meeting with them the other day, and they wouldn't open their iPad to do the piece of work that we were doing together because they won't allow any of their information on the cloud. So it's not everybody in the IT area and in the private sector who is actually letting their information loose. Some of them are very, very careful because they have issues of trust as well. And I think we have to be, you know, a bit cautious about that.
I think we might have touched a bit of a bedrock issue here, which is kind of handy, although I'm not sure that Pete would necessarily put IBM out, with all due respect to IBM, as the leader in this space.
Still,
but Andrew, this idea that, you know, if you want to develop capability, there's a lot of it there already, and is that part of the way of connecting with some of that capability that's already in Victoria for the public service to be able to orchestrate and pull together, or is there some bigger issue at stake?
Look, absolutely. I think the challenge, and Pete's right, we are elephantine and slow moving, and we're by our nature risk averse because we're dealing with the public's money. You know, the Victorian government's 15% of the state economy, and if we bugger something up badly, we affect people's lives in a fundamental way. They lose a job, they lose a house, their children are unemployed. So we don't take decisions lightly. I think in terms of using capability, look, we are taking steps. I guess the challenge is what questions to ask and how to interact, and we're doing that slowly. So in Victoria, we've just released 1,000 data sets out to the community. Everything from geocoded soil quality to rainfall data going back 150 years, it's out there. And that will create value and drive productivity in the economy. So we're starting. I absolutely agree we've got a way to go, and there's a lot out there. One thing I would challenge Pete on, passionate communities aren't informed communities. And I said before about the conversation happening in the community, there is a real danger of misunderstanding passion for informed. And one of the things I worry a bit about, you know, the Twitterverse and the conversation that's happening, if it's uninformed, as a community, we rush to a decision on something which has really long-term implications. There are long tails in public policy. Look how long ago we started to move the pension age for women, for example. That was a long time ago, and it's moved slowly. So we rush to a decision and then repent at leisure. And so passion's great, tempering it with information, evaluation and strategic judgment, that's the challenge for us.
Okay, I'm going to quick write a reply, and then I'm going to go to Elizabeth, and then I want to shift as well. But this idea that it's sort of rushed and reckless on one side and sort of slow and steady on the other.
I was one of the two main guys who rebuilt the town of Flowerdale after Black Saturday. We were the ones that the government didn't like because we were running rings around you. So we didn't know everything, but I know Peter Cosgrove. So I called him in and said, mate, tell us how to run this. the community said we want to rebuild sustainably. We don't know anything about that, so I called a mate at CSIRO and we ran a community forum a month after the fires with the best fire people, the best environment people, the best renewable energy people. Passionate people attract skills. Now, if there's knee-jerk reactions to stuff you do, but we think in ecosystems, we use our networks and we bring knowledge and skills to the table. You know, my sister got burnt out, she just happens to know the best web guy in the country. You know, so am I informed? Bloody oath I am. Virgo, the other guy who ran it, used to be the National Logistics Manager for TNT. So, mate, just because we're passionate, but we're not stupid. No, we pull in the thing. So just, you know, you got to stop thinking that you are smarter than us. We're smarter than you. The smartest guys are outside the room. We'll work with you if you create the platforms to let us do it. You know, and putting out data sets, wonderful. Build and leverage passionate communities that want to make stuff happen. So having the data, one thing, curating communities is something that you guys ought to get really good at.
Elizabeth, I'm beginning to feel really like Tony Jones now. This is getting quite, I'm feeling quite warm.
Well, you told me you wanted to fire up.
No, that's fine. I'm not. Even if I wanted to stop you, I wouldn't even try.
Just a couple of comments. Look, I absolutely agree with Peter around issues mobilisation. I see it in the work that I do every day. The fact is, people say to me, oh, feminism's dead in Australia. No, it's actually evolved, the feminist movement, and it's alive and well in the blogosphere, on the web. Issues such as, for example, just we saw the mobilisation around women's photos around breastfeeding on Facebook. Within, I think, 12 hours, over 200,000 women had come together to put up more photos and mobilise around the issues. So I do think that a lot of the work and the maybe traditional mechanisms and means that we've done, it's actually entering a new era, and the timeframes are shutting right down. So you need to be agile. There's no question to survive in a complex and particularly knowledge economy, the areas that we're in. We need to be much more responsive, much more rapid. And I do think the public service, we have been laggards in that area. And I just take my own example. I came in as a Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and I figured if I want to set a strategic agenda, how am I going to do that process? And what I decided was I'd go on a listening tour to actually get out and speak to people, but to run concurrently with that a virtual listening tour. So to have a blog, everything happening, people being able to contribute. And I remember trying to navigate through the regulation in the public service to see whether that was a possible way of doing it. And it took literally months to get that virtual listening tour actually up and happening. In the end, the information that I sourced through the web and through people's interacting with me that way was as valuable as it was in meeting people face to face. And it is about identifying who are the change agents in the community, also within government, and it's about connecting. I think connecting is a really big part of a picture as well. So I don't think it's about who's smarter. I actually think it's about working with the common ground that we have, bringing our different parts of expertise, but recognising that the world's changing and therefore we need to change the way we do business as well.
Speed and intensity is part of it. Tom, I want to pick up your point and to see whether any of this is beginning to resonate in the context of your earlier complaint, if you like, that we tend to consult, you know, we're here to hear, I think was one of your cliches. Is this stuff going to break through in any way, do you think?
And I think it's an important discussion. For a couple, I just thought I might just clarify that I'm no longer a public servant. I retired in 2010, so don't think that I'm representing.
So now you should really listen up, I think, at this point, clearly.
The public service, and I do consult to the feds, but look, I think there's a couple of really big issues. One is, from my recollection, a lot of the IT is outsourced. It's not actually in-house within the government, sure. So we need to look at that. But we do have departments that have systems that don't talk to each other, that don't talk across departments, which is very difficult to be able to get information out. The real issue, I think, is, and what Pete said was about the community. The community wanted to get engaged in rebuilding their community. But when we come to Aboriginal communities, the government seems to think that they have all the ideas. They don't need to consult with the community. They can go in and put in an intervention or just apply practices directly on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The whole issue, and I go back to report after report within the APS that get very little take up. I guess the big one was Peter Shergold did a few years ago with ANOA, and it was all about policy development and program implementation. I believe that was a very good report. I wrote about it at the time, and it should have been able to provide us the guidance that we needed to be citizen-centred. And that's what a human rights-based or a developmental approach is all about. It's about giving people the say, the control, empowering them to give real inputs in. And you know, until we do that, we're going to have the real issues of lack of engagement, but also with the massive changes that occur across public policy, you do get a despondency by not only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but all peoples. You know, if change is too regular and also without any sort of a way that people can relate to it, then it becomes a problem. But I just wanted to pick up the other one on IT, because I think up until recently, when we had a social inclusion board, which I was a member of, which has now been abolished, but part of our role was to go around and work with departments and look at working with people, the most disadvantaged people. And one of the issues that was raised quite often was that government departments are putting information up on websites that people had to access, and yet people didn't have access to media to be able to get access to that material, or they didn't have plans that allowed them to download information. So it became a fairly significant impost on somebody who's a disadvantaged low-income person to have to go in and download a whole lot of material from government departments. So I think it's a bit of a challenge on both ways. It's good to be innovative and provide these sort of different levels of service, but we also have to be cognizant of what the user is able to access.
Cool. I've got a couple questions are floating in on the magic little machine here, and I'm going to start opening up very shortly, so I hope you've got your questions ready. But I'm going to throw a couple more cliches. We'll come to questions in a minute, just bear with me 2 minutes. I want a couple of other quick cliches. One of them has actually come in from the iPad, so we'll start that up, and I'm going to get each member of the panel just to quickly respond. One of them is this notion, it was actually raised again by Gary Banks this morning, you know, probably one of the biggest and most enduring cliches about public sector reform is the idea that it's harder and harder to give frank and fearless advice, this notion of speaking truth to power. And I wonder whether each member of the panel just quickly would have a reflection on, in fact, whether you think that's true and whether, in fact, we've got ways we can begin to break through that. Or perhaps, like a lot of cliches, maybe it's not as true as it sounds. I'm happy to start anywhere. I don't know, Sue, if you want to, given your long...
Look, I've worked for 33 ministers and I've never had any trouble giving them the advice that I thought they should have.
Okay, so write that one down. Have a chat to Sue afterwards. Andrew, what's your sense?
So I get to tell it like it is. I think what may have changed is how to tell truth to power.
Right.
So it's changed and evolved over time, but when you need to do it, decision makers, people who really ultimately own the problem, listen.
Yep.
Mightn't agree with you, but they listen.
Verona, what do you reckon? You've been watching this debate for and this particular cliche. What's your sense of it? Harder?
I don't think department secretaries have got any problem in telling it how it is. Can you imagine Dennis Richardson trying to pull his punches? I think that...
Everyone's just thinking about that for a minute. Now you should move on, I think. Very good. Yep.
I just think that they just probably do it quietly and on occasions diplomatically. I'm not sure that... I think perhaps it is harder to say it publicly, but I don't think it was ever easy. I mean, I think that if you look back at the Mandarins, they never said anything publicly. I mean, the Seven Dwarves.
That's another way to do it, of course. Yeah.
So, but I mean, I think that it's an ongoing issue. It's always an issue, of course.
Cool. So, other comments, Pete? Any thoughts from you?
I mean, well, surprisingly, I do deal with a lot of government ministers, and I find that, again, I find the politicians, when they're passionate about something or when there's something really to do, they really want things to move. But, and I think the senior people in the departments tend to want things to move and they have open and frank discussions. But as it starts to move down the chain and people start to look at, you know, I'm a level 4, so I can't tell this and I can't do this, the structure of the public service sort of just grinds to a halt. They're not used to collaborating across departments and all that stuff. So, so I don't think there's any lack of, you know, openness and frankness behind closed doors or seeking out opinion, but I do think It's just hard to make the public service be agile and move
Okay.
and sing and dance when you need them to.
Yeah, all right. Let's take a couple more comments. And go on, Tom, and then we'll go on to Elizabeth. Yeah.
Sorry,
Please, no, go
I've been a senior bureaucrat, but also a senior advisor to a minister, and so I can speak with some confidence that most public servants, senior public servants, at least at secretary level and DepSec level, are pretty frank and fearless in their advice. The real tension lies with what the politicians' ideological position is, and whether that conforms with what the frank and fearless advice that they're receiving, because ultimately it's the minister who has the say about what goes. And you know, it didn't matter what sort of frank and fearless advice went to the previous couple of previous governments ago. When we looked at the anti-intervention, when there was all this rhetoric out there that there were pedophile rings in operation, and we've yet to find a pedophile ring after 3 police investigations. That didn't stop the ministers from continually pushing that, and the government from pushing that, and so we had a whole range of reforms that took place on the back of misinformation, and that was counter to what was being provided by the politicians. And I travelled with another senior minister at the time through the Anangupinyara lands, APY lands in South Australia, and the police had told this minister that of the 13 prosecutions for child sexual abuse, 12 of the perpetrators, convicted perpetrators, were non-Indigenous people who were contracting in the community, and there was 1 Indigenous person, and yet the minister has yet to ever declare that, but they'll still push the whole issue that it's you know, an Aboriginal issue, and there's pedophile rings.
Okay, cool. Elizabeth, quick comment, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I've got one right here.
I think in government, the hierarchy and power is very overt, a bit like I see in the military, as you say. I mean, most of my career's been spent in business, but coming into government, seeing APS 3, 4, 5, 6, everyone knows where everyone else is in the conversation. And I just think in the connected and mobilised world, good ideas, good advice can come from the most junior person. Power, you don't wear a label on your face saying what level you're sitting on, and I think that's something that I notice in government context, which I don't notice in other connected contexts.
Great. I'm going to open up for questions. I've got one hand up here already, so this is the point where, I've got one over here, so we'll get a couple to get going. Maria, press the button and speak into the magic microphone.
Still requesting, but I've got a relatively loud voice, so here I go.
You're in.
Maria Katsonis from the Department of Premier and Cabinet of Victoria. First, a comment, Tony/Martin, that will lead to a question, and that is that I believe it is possible to have a passion for good public policy and public administration and marry it with a tempered and considered approach that's imbued both with good innovation and an appetite for risk. Number 2, my question is to the panel. How do we leverage the respective strengths of each other sector, whether it be the private sector, whether it be the not-for-profit sector, or whether indeed it be the public sector, without it necessarily becoming an adversarial relationship about who is the smartest, who is the fastest, and who are the doers?
Okay. I'm going to let any member of the panel pick that up, or I could direct the traffic, which I'm not going to do. Go right ahead.
Well, I just believe the word respect. I don't have any trouble talking to any sectors. I sit on voluntary agencies, I do work for government, I do everything. And I think that if nobody thinks that they know everything, and that everyone respects everybody else's opinion, and if you open up opportunities, and that's what you have to do, you have to open up opportunities for people to have a conversation. I think we can do that a little bit more. There is a bit too much closed-door stuff goes on. Now, sometimes the closed-door stuff is because the minister says, I don't want anyone to know. Or someone else says, this is an idea that we're just generating. And unfortunately, everyone has an experience of taking the idea out a little bit and suddenly it's all over the place. And if there's any problem that I have with being respectful and opening up, it is that somehow or other you've got to be able to get everybody in the room to understand it's a conversation with limits on it for the moment. And that's a really important thing about trust.
Yeah, that idea about how you have conversations which the answers to which you don't yet know is actually quite an interesting challenge. Any other comments just generally about what Maria raised?
Could I dive in? So we're about to embark on a conversation with the community sector that Peter Shergold's framed for us. And that's really a strategic conversation about what does the next 10 years look like, how will we move forward, acknowledging that clearly we don't have the answers. They have many of the answers, they've got good questions, we've got questions, how are we going to do this? I think it is a slow-moving conversation. That's the other thing. You've got to build trust, and there's, we've heard there's not a lot of trust at the moment, but some of the really important conversations are slow-moving, and that again is, I think it's just an interesting conundrum. In a world where the conversation seems to happen very quickly, the really big conversations affecting people's lives often happen quite slowly. And I don't know how we tune that. That's something our society has to work out.
That's a big... Do you want to say something very quickly? And then Verona,
I can remember being very impressed with the Canadians once, because if they had a very difficult or wicked problem, they got all the people in the room and they informed up the least informed people, so they trained them beforehand. And they got an external person to government to do the piece of work, so it wasn't the minister controlling the conversation. And they then gave the considered opinion to the minister. And I think you can do it by distancing it somehow.
Different... Verona, and then Pete, and then we'll keep going.
Some people have got good conversational skills and some people haven't. And I think that one of the great strengths of a lot of public servants who I've met is being able to discuss in a nice way issues and ask questions and answer questions. And I think that probably what needs to be done is just choose the right people to have those conversations. And I think that all the training that public servants get and all the meetings you go to, which baffle us, but give you these enormous skills in having conversations that are about different ideas but don't have to become adversarial. And I think they're just strengths that should be harnessed.
Cool. Let's keep going. Quick comments? Yeah,
it's a bit like we did with Telstra and crowd support. Instead of Telstra call people answering questions from scripts, just your smartest customers who deal with the exotic problems answer for you. So, like I've got a query from government, I actually don't need to query government. Why not query somebody's had to deal with a four-way cross-department thing because there's a property thing here and a legal thing there. So, you don't do it peer-to-peer. Make it open. Make yourself porous. Create platforms. Curate communities. Ask for outcomes. We're trying to do this. How could you do it? Look at what's going on out there in the world around education and the Khan Academy and say, let's prototype an experiment using Khan Academy content pre-class, and kids get in there and, collaborate together. It's not hard. Put co-working spaces where instead of departments sitting on the one floor together, get everyone working together, or go down and work at the Hub or Inspire 9 or any of those co-working spaces and make body contact with the people who are doing stuff. It's like there's a multitude of ways, and it's not adversarial. It's like, we'll do it for you if you let us. But, again, it's like, Telstra was didn't say, oh, well, what if a customer gives a wrong answer? Well, they give a wrong answer, they'll get rated 1 star out of 5. If they give good answers, they'll get 5 out of 5.
Okay.
It's like eBay, YouTube, all that. You know that.
You know that, Elizabeth. Sorry.
She does know it.
Maria, I know. Elizabeth, go right ahead.
Just a quick one. The most effective, or one of the most effective examples I've seen actually comes from Victoria, where the Victorian government decided to have that conversation with NGOs, business, and it was around domestic violence. So I think the first thing is that these conversations that work the best are issues-based, but they're where governments are prepared to share power. And that's what happened. The government came out and said, look, we don't know how to solve domestic violence in our state. We know it's escalating. We need all of you on board. So they brought in community sector, health providers, police, everywhere, and they said, we want to share our power with you to find the best solution. And it's well recognised that Victoria has the best approach, an integrated approach to domestic violence in our country, because it doesn't matter whether you go to housing, you present there, you present at police, you present at the local women's NGO or in your local business. The approach is a common approach, and it's one that recognises an integration model.
I'm keen to get a couple more questions. We've got about 10 more minutes. And sorry, go right ahead, Tom. I beg your pardon.
I just wanted to raise 2 examples. One is a bit of a plug. Watch ABC 24 tonight, and you'll see this program, the interview I did earlier today about the Australian Feral Camels Management Program, which is a great example of what can happen if people work together. And this project was to control feral camels across four jurisdictions. So we had 4 different government people working with the Commonwealth. We had representatives from the community on this project. Bottom line is, end of the day, worked very cooperatively. We managed to cull 160,000 camels, protect 18 biodiversity sites across remote Australia, and return $4 million to the government of unspent money because we were so efficient, and they wouldn't let us keep it. But anyhow,
there's a surprise.
That's another story. But I think
there's another story.
The real tangible other very good example is the Close the Gap campaign for Aboriginal health equality, which started off from a community engagement to then getting both the federal minister and prime minister, the government on board, and the opposition on board, and all the minor parties on board, and COAG accepting that we had to do something, and starting to allocate money, which is in the vicinity of over $8 billion. But we've also got the states and territories, by and large, all on board on this campaign. So it's a citizen-run campaign in conjunction with government. It's the only bilateral, bipartisan agreement in Indigenous affairs, has been since 2008, right. And hopefully it'll lead the way to health equality by 2030.
That's a very interesting success story. There was a hand up somewhere around about here. There it is, just behind the camera. So press the magic button and things will happen. No.
Talk now. Gotcha. Barry Anderson with Tanner Jones Management Consultants. One of the quick comments I wanted to make, Tom, you're spot on with Peter Shergold and the ANAO engagement things. One of the critical things that comes up in all the capability reviews that we do is stakeholder engagement and a lack of focus on benefits being delivered to the community. One of the things that I think there are a whole range of documents, if you want a document to read, Cabinet Implementation Unit guidelines, all sorts of stuff there. Yeah. But one of the things that I think is probably critical in all the comments has made and Andrew has made, it's actually focusing on the role of people whose job is out in the community.
Yeah.
I was noticed that when the head of the game the review was being undertaken, Brian Gleeson, the Coordinator General for Closing the Gap, made the observation that the closer you are to Parliament House, the higher the classification of your job. And what we actually needed was band ones and band twos out in all the godforsaken places with expertise in anthropology, sociology, psychology, community building. And we need those people out there actually working in those communities, not sitting here. Because I constantly sit in rooms full of terrified people who, when I say cast the net wide, talk to more stakeholders, the moderates will rein in the radicals. Right. Do we want to do it? No. Okay. Let's get it out in the field.
All right, quick comments. Sue, do you want to quickly comment about it? It sounds very resonant, I think, with some of the things you were saying.
Yeah, sure. But I think it's one of the things that I wanted to say is you've got to walk in the shoes of the people that we're there to serve. And the people are out there. I mean, I get so angry when I see those locked doors in the Canberra offices and the state government offices, because out there the police, the social workers, the nurses, everybody else are working and dealing with human beings who are, you know, at risk. Put this a little bit off the track, but we don't have to send out the most highest on the ladder. There is fabulous talent already out there, and I think that we should encourage much more local initiative. We need to give people permission within boundaries to do all sorts of things. And in fact, take up the things that Peter said. We've created, governments have done it over time, a dependency. Whenever there's a problem, we'll fix it, fix it. We can't fix it. They're cutting back all of the staff. The important thing now is to say, how can we help a society deal with these problems? You know, it upsets me when they keep bashing up the social workers on child abuse. Child abuse is one of our biggest issues, biggest intractable issues. And it's not the bureaucrats' fault. You know, it's something that the society has to deal with themselves. But, you know, heads are rolling, premiers are going, heads of departments vanish because we deal with these problems wrongly, and we have to significantly shift the way we do it. But the skills are out there, and we need to get our own people to make the changes. So
find them and amplify them. Any other quick comments about that? Could I just dive in? Other hands up, just let me know, because we've got just a few more minutes.
Could I just dive in on
this?
Go
right ahead.
Quickly, and here I will agree with Pete that...
write that one down.
Write that one down.
That on film?
And you can tweet it if you need to.
No, we're crashing through all the cliches here. That won't take very long. I told you it wouldn't take long.
I'd like to challenge the notion that the government is the answer.
Yes,
I think we might have reached a point where we've reached our limits, and the future might be peeling back some layers. The government isn't the answer to a happy life.
That's right.
There are some core services that we need to provide, and we need to provide the best core services we possibly can. But the notion that intervention all the time needs to come from the big bureaucracy in every instance, and I think we've found this in remote Indigenous communities, there's not a lot of evidence that we're really kicking not enough evidence that we're kicking lots of goals. And so, you know, this notion of empowering the community to find, in some areas, not in every area, but in some areas...
Pick the right ones.
Pick the right ones, the community to find its own solution, and government just enables, might be part of how we survive for the next 10 to 20 years.
I sense a real risk of consensus breaking out here. We have to be very careful about that, clearly, especially if I was working for the ABC. Go right ahead.
I'm in violent agreement with everyone down there. I think the greatest malaise our society's got, that people in this country think as soon as there's a problem, the government's got to deal with it, and unless we take ownership at a community level, not in a knee-jerk reaction or stuff, but say, we want to learn, we want to be empowered, and when you send out all your anthropologists, sociologists and rocket scientists, don't tell us what you're going to do, just, I think Tom will agree with this, ask us what we need, and ask us what can you do for yourself, and how can you teach us?
And how can you put those things together and blend? Any other comments?
No.
All good? Okay. I'm going to give the panel a chance in a moment, because we have got 5 minutes to go, and one of the big jobs of any good panellist is to take the floor manager's cue and say wind up, but also make sure you all get out for afternoon tea about 60 seconds earlier, because then you'll think it's really been a great session. But I will take any other quick questions if we have any. I don't want to cut anybody off too much. These folks will be around for the tea break and come and grab them and tackle them and, nicely, obviously, talk to them. But what I wanted to say quickly to each member of the panel, just as a kind of final wrap up, if you are really trying to push through and beyond some of these cliches, and I think we've crashed into a few. I'm not sure how many we've crashed past, but we've certainly crashed into some of them. What is it in the public sector in terms of leadership and so on? What are the couple of attributes you think are necessary to make sure we don't get stuck in some of these cliches and really make some progress? So just a couple of quick, literally kind of off the top of your head, thoughts about what things need to be on the table so that we can begin to move forward past some of the cliches that we've rehearsed. So here's a couple. Andrew looks like he's ready to start the ball rolling.
They're really complicated times, and leaders in every field are struggling to find vision and narrative because they're complex times. And for many of us, that's a real struggle. So what do you fall back on? I think we need to do a better job for the people who do the work on the ground in creating context for them. Because if you create context for people, they feel more confident and they're better able to take decisions. And so I think for people in leadership roles in the public service, it is about getting out on the ground and talking to people and describing the world that's happening to them and giving them permission to take a few risks. If they take those risks, you've got to be standing with them because people see us evaporate when bad things happen. And that's the challenge for us.
Just for the sake of variety, before I might just flick down the other end of the table instead of just working all the way down. Tom, any quick last... a couple of quick comments.
Yeah, look, I would, really encourage everybody to think about a human rights-based approach. Government doesn't like it, but look at a development approach or one of these. Understand a little bit about social determinants and cultural determinants, and in applying your work, really think about the people-centred approach and empowering people to take control of their own lives and to be effectively engaged. And I say this with acknowledging that I'm a little conflicted, but I think that people like Jane Holton, who's taken the lead in a population health approach to tackle Indigenous smoking, to be able to put the responsibility back to the community, give the community enough information to make an informed decision, develop people in the community to go out and spread the word to empower people to take control of their lives and come up with the solutions, is the type of way that we in the public sector need to go. And that requires a bit of trust, a bit of confidence, and a willingness to be able to stand up and take any criticism, because if we're looking at and what we should be looking at is sustainability, and that means that we need to have attitudinal cultural change. It doesn't happen overnight. There's going to be mistakes along the way, but we have to be prepared to accept that, knowing that the end goal will be one where the community is able to change a behaviour or get involved. And I'll finish with one last thing, in case you hadn't noticed. White ribbon, men standing up against violence against women. 25th of November we celebrate, and there's no excuse for any guy to be a perpetrator or to sit around and watch anybody else talk disparagingly about women, or to, I guess, allow that conversation to go in your presence. So stand up, guys, and swear the oath.
Yeah, that will stand on its own, I think. But Elizabeth, not a bad place for you to segue. And just quickly, so we can wrap up.
More. So just quickly, I just worry that at the minute, because of the fear that's permeating the public service, because of the uncertainty, that we'll go back to default model. We'll just kind of galvanise to what we know well, and we'll continue in that on that path. What I'd like to see the public service do, and leaders of a public service, is actually engage much more broadly with all members of a public service to say, come with your bold ideas about how we can change this for the future. Nothing is off the table, and this is exactly what the Male Champions of Change, of whom Ian Watt is a very committed Male Champions of Change. That's what they did. They went out there and said, come with the idea we rejected last week, your boldest ideas about what we should do, and let's start getting some group ownership of this and moving forward together, recognising we're going into a period of intense change.
I think from my point of view, it's moving away from the notion of public sector as people who are responsible for the vision of every and solution of every problem that we face, getting away from being scared of doing stuff, reviewing your position on risk and understanding risk is massive projects with long-term things that are probably likely to fail into terms of smaller, sharper, empowered experiments. But if we move the vision of the public sector for a platform for sustainable, empowered communities and really got that culture through the whole place and through our society, I think we'd be a million miles ahead.
Great. Verona, and then I'm going to get Sue to wrap up very quickly.
Okay, I think that there is a great sense in which the public sector, public service has become sort of depersonalised, and I think it's really important to somehow communicate with the citizens of the nation that public servants are people, that the public service is a sort of an ecosystem, if you like, but it's a group of people, and that those people, you people, are citizens as well. And I think that in depersonalising the bureaucracy, you set up an adversarial system. Somehow that needs, we need more human faces, I think.
Excellent. And Sue, final comment.
Everyone said the things I wanted to say, which is get the vision, get the young people and other people to follow, empower them to do things. Driving out fear, I know because I see it all the time, that as soon as the cuts come in, everybody gets frightened. People say, what's in it for me? People are pressed, people are scared, and we have to drive out fear. What I wanted to add that was a little bit different is to go back to my original point, which is the public service is terribly important for the economy. It doesn't matter whether it's at whatever level, we make it very difficult for people to do business with us. And I think that one of the things that we should do in the future is to give everyone permission in our places to work out how it is to make it easier for people to do business with government for that business that we should be doing.
Work I know that's actually been happening a bit in Canberra. Let me just finish with one last comment, then I'm going to get you to thank the panel. If you think about it, and it came up at many, many occasions this afternoon, if you really want to break through cliche, you have to understand the relationship between cliche and power. So if you want to rise above cliches, you have to deal with the power story or you're not going to do it. And I think we've had a fantastic exposition, very energetic and quite lively, but mostly consensual towards the end, I think, from a range of perspectives about exactly how we need to do that in order to break through. So please join me in thanking a fabulous panel.